The red sun of Parathi Prime cast long shadows across the crystal towers of the imperial capital. War Commander Zethka stood on his balcony, watching the daily fire ceremonies below. Young Parathi warriors danced through jets of flame that would kill most other species in seconds. Their dark red skin glowed with internal heat and their eyes burned like tiny stars. This was the power that made the Parathi the most feared warriors in 3 star systems. Zethka's communication device buzzed with an urgent message from the Galactic Council. He touched the crystal surface and a hologram appeared showing Ambassador Veltar, his old friend from the diplomatic corps. "Greetings, War Commander," Veltar said, his voice carrying the familiar crackle of controlled flame that all Parathi possessed. "The Council has discovered a new species. They call themselves humans." Zethka's mandibles clicked in mild interest. New species were discovered regularly, and most were either too primitive to matter or too weak to survive long in the galaxy's harsh political climate. "What makes these humans worth my attention?" The hologram shifted to show a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. "They come from this world called Earth. Initial scans show they are water-based life forms quite fragile by our standards. Their technology is primitive, but they recently achieved faster-than-light travel." "Water-based?" Zethka laughed, a sound like crackling logs. "Let me guess, they fear fire like most weak species." "That appears to be the case," Veltar confirmed. "Their planet has large oceans, and they seem to require constant hydration. Most interesting is that they actually use water to fight fires on their world. Can you imagine? Using water against the sacred flame?" This amused Zethka greatly. In Parathi culture, fire was life itself. Their ancestors had evolved on a world where volcanic activity was constant, where survival meant embracing heat rather than fleeing from it. Over millions of years, they had become living furnaces, capable of surviving in environments that would instantly cook other species. "What do they want from the Council?" Zethka asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. New species always wanted the same things: protection, trade agreements, and access to advanced technology. "The usual requests," Veltar replied. "But there is one unusual demand. They want to participate in the next military demonstration series. They claim they have weapons that might interest the established powers." Zethka's eyes flared brighter with amusement. "These water creatures think they can impress us with their primitive weapons? What do they fight with, sticks and stones?" The reports mention something called gunpowder and chemical explosives. Nothing that would concern a species with our thermal resistance. The war commander walked back into his chamber, past walls decorated with the melted armor of defeated enemies. Each piece told a story of Parathi dominance, of battles won through superior mastery of heat and flame. His personal weapon collection lined one wall: plasma rifles that could cut through starship hulls, thermal grenades that created miniature stars in his pride and joy, a biocannon that channeled his own internal fire into devastating beams of superheated gas. "When is this demonstration scheduled?" he asked. "In 10 cycles. On the neutral world of Kepler 442c. The mining companies have already cleared the area and reinforced it to handle significant thermal damage." Zethka made his decision quickly. This would be an opportunity to remind the galaxy why the Parathi Empire commanded respect. A demonstration of their power against these weak humans would send a clear message to any other species considering challenging Parathi supremacy. "We'll personally lead our demonstration," he announced. "Prepare my finest warriors and our most advanced weapons. Let's show these humans what real fire looks like." Veltar's image flickered with what might have been concern. "Are you certain that's wise, War Commander? Perhaps a smaller force would be sufficient for such a primitive species." "Nonsense," Zethka replied, his chest glowing brighter with excitement. "This is an opportunity to establish proper order early. When word spreads that even their best weapons cannot scratch Parathi armor, other species will think twice before challenging us." After the communication ended, Zethka began planning his demonstration. He would bring 20 of his elite heat guard, warriors who had survived the trial of 1,000 flames and could walk through molten metal without flinching. Their weapons would include the latest plasma technology, devices that could reach temperatures of over 4,000 degrees and maintain that heat for extended periods. He also decided to bring the Flame Dancers, a special unit that specialized in close combat within superheated environments. These warriors could fight effectively even while surrounded by plasma fire, their movements graceful and deadly as they wielded weapons that channeled their own body heat into focused beams of destruction. The next few days passed quickly as Zethka prepared for the journey. His armorer crafted special demonstration shells for their weapons, designed to create spectacular visual effects while showcasing the true power of Parathi thermal technology. His tactical advisor compiled reports on human physiology, confirming their weakness to heat and their dependence on water for survival. "It's almost pathetic," the advisor commented while reviewing the data. "Their optimal body temperature is barely above freezing by our standards. A single blast from our weakest weapon would probably vaporize them instantly." Zethka reviewed the tactical reports with growing confidence. "Humans seem to have no natural resistance to heat. Their technology was primitive, their bodies fragile, and their understanding of thermal dynamics appeared to be limited to basic concepts like combustion and steam generation." On the day of departure, Zethka stood before his assembled forces on the launch platform of their warship. The 20 Heat Guard warriors stood at attention, their armor glowing with contained thermal energy. The flame dancers moved restlessly, eager to demonstrate their skills. Behind them, the ship's weapons specialists loaded the demonstration equipment: plasma cannons, thermal projection systems, and the massive Parathi fire sculptures that would show these humans what true artistry with flame looked like. "Warriors of the Flame," Zethka addressed his troops, his voice carrying across the platform like the roar of a furnace. "Today we travel to meet a new species that thinks they understand fire. We will show them the difference between playing with sparks and commanding the very essence of thermal energy itself." The warriors cheered, their voices creating a sound like a massive bonfire consuming dry wood. As their ship lifted off from Parathi Prime, Zethka felt satisfaction in knowing that this demonstration would be remembered for generations. The humans would learn their place in the galactic order, and other species would be reminded why the Parathi Empire had never lost a battle involving thermal warfare. The journey to Kepler 442c would take several days, giving him time to perfect his presentation. He wanted the humans to understand not just Parathi power, but Parathi artistry. Fire was not merely a weapon to his people. It was a form of expression, a way of life, a sacred trust passed down from their ancestors who had first learned to dance with volcanic flame. As the stars wheeled past the viewport, Zethka planned a demonstration that would showcase 3,000 years of Parathi fire mastery. These humans would witness thermal displays beyond their comprehension, and they would understand why the galaxy's thermal arts belonged to the children of flame. He had no idea that in a few days, everything he believed about fire would change forever. The barren surface of Kepler 442c stretched endlessly under its pale white star. The mining companies had done their work well, clearing a vast demonstration area and installing protective barriers around the observation platforms. The ground was solid rock mixed with metal ore deposits, perfect for withstanding the kind of thermal punishment that Parathi weapons could deliver. Zethka stepped off his transport ship and immediately felt satisfied with the chosen location. The thin atmosphere would allow their plasma weapons to achieve maximum range and effect. The rocky surface would provide excellent targets for demonstrating both precision and raw destructive power. Most importantly, there were no flammable materials nearby that might interfere with their carefully planned presentation. The human delegation had arrived the previous day in a ship that looked primitive compared to Parathi technology. Where Parathi vessels were sleek and built to channel thermal energy efficiently, the human ship appeared blocky and utilitarian. It reminded Zethka of the cargo haulers used by lesser species who had not yet mastered advanced engineering. Ambassador Veltar met him at the landing platform, his diplomatic robes shimmering with controlled heat patterns. "The humans have been examining the demonstration area," he reported. "They seem particularly interested in wind patterns and atmospheric composition." "Strange concerns for a species about to witness plasma technology," Zethka observed. "Perhaps they are trying to calculate how quickly they should retreat once we begin." The observation area filled with representatives from various galactic species, all eager to see how these newcomers would compare to established military powers. Zethka recognized several familiar faces: the crystalline Zephyrians who specialized in energy manipulation, the heavily armored Corvin who preferred kinetic weapons, and even a few members of the telepathic Mindari collective who rarely attended such crude displays of physical force. The human delegation consisted of only 5 individuals, a surprisingly small group compared to the elaborate entourages that most species brought to such events. Their leader was a woman of average height with short brown hair and calm brown eyes. She wore a simple uniform that looked more like work clothes than military dress. Her name, according to the briefing materials, was Captain Sarah Chen. Zethka approached the human group with his usual confident stride. The heat radiating from his body should have been uncomfortable for these water-based creatures. But Captain Chen showed no sign of distress as he drew near. "Welcome to Kepler 442c, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3,000 years of Pyrathi military tradition. "I am War Commander Zethka of the Pyrathi Empire. I trust you are prepared to witness true mastery of thermal warfare." Captain Chen nodded politely. "Thank you for arranging this demonstration, War Commander. We're looking forward to seeing what the Pyrathi can do." Her calm response puzzled Zethka. Most species showed at least some nervousness when meeting Pyrathi warriors for the first time. The heat, the glowing eyes, the barely contained energy that radiated from their bodies usually made other creatures uncomfortable. Yet this human seemed completely relaxed. "Before we begin," Captain Chen continued, "would it be acceptable for us to present our own demonstration after yours? We brought some equipment that might interest the galactic community." Zethka glanced at the human equipment area. He could see several large cylindrical objects and what appeared to be fuel containers. Nothing looked particularly advanced or threatening. "Of course," he replied magnanimously, "though I suspect you may find your weapons somewhat inadequate after seeing ours." The Pyrathi forces took their positions on the demonstration field. Zethka had planned the presentation like a carefully choreographed performance. First would come the precision displays, showing the accuracy and control possible with Pyrathi thermal technology. Then the raw power demonstrations, revealing the devastating capability of their weapons. Finally, the artistic presentations where his flame dancers would show that Pyrathi fire mastery was not just about destruction, but about beauty and grace. The first phase began with sniper demonstrations. Pyrathi marksmen used focused plasma beams to cut precise geometric patterns into solid rock targets at distances of over a kilometer. The beams moved with surgical precision, carving complex designs that would have taken conventional tools hours to complete. Each shot was perfectly controlled with no wasted energy or collateral damage. Next came the heavy weapons. Massive plasma cannons unleashed streams of superheated gas that turned entire sections of rock face into flowing lava. The temperatures were so intense that the air itself began to glow, creating spectacular visual effects as thermal currents danced across the demonstration area. Target structures that had been specially constructed for the demonstration simply vanished under the assault, leaving behind pools of molten metal and glass. The crowd of observers murmured appreciatively. Even species that were familiar with advanced weaponry seemed impressed by the combination of power and precision that Pyrathi technology offered. Zethka felt his chest swell with pride as he watched the reactions of the various ambassadors and military observers. But it was the flame dancers who truly stole the show. These elite warriors moved through clouds of superheated plasma as if it were cool mist. Their weapons channeled their own body heat into focused beams that could cut through armor or carve artistic patterns with equal skill. They fought mock battles in environments where the air temperature exceeded the melting point of most metals, their movements graceful and deadly. The finale featured Zethka himself wielding his personal biocannon. This weapon channeled his own internal thermal energy, amplified it through advanced Pyrathi technology, and projected it as a beam of concentrated plasma that could reach temperatures of over 5,000 degrees. He demonstrated its power by completely vaporizing a series of massive rock formations, leaving behind only clouds of superheated gas and the lingering smell of ozone. As the spectacular display ended and the demonstration area cooled slightly, Zethka turned to face the human delegation. He expected to see awe, perhaps fear, certainly respect for the power they had just witnessed. Instead, Captain Chen was examining some kind of handheld device and having a quiet conversation with her team members. "Impressive," she said when she noticed his attention. "Your people certainly know how to handle plasma technology. The precision control is particularly noteworthy." Zethka waited for more effusive praise, but the human seemed to have said all she intended to say. Her calm demeanor was beginning to irritate him. Didn't she understand what she had just witnessed? The Pyrathi had just demonstrated weapons that could destroy starships, level cities, and reshape planetary surfaces. "Perhaps," he said with barely contained condescension, "you would like to reconsider your own demonstration?" I would hate for your people to feel embarrassed by the comparison. Captain Chen looked up from her device and smiled. It was not the nervous smile of someone feeling intimidated, but rather the expression of someone who found the situation genuinely amusing. That's very considerate, she replied. But we've come all this way, and it would be rude not to show our hosts what we brought. She gestured to her team, and they began moving toward their equipment area. Zethka watched with growing curiosity as they handled their weapons. The devices looked crude compared to Parathi technology, more like industrial tools than military equipment. Whatever they were planning, it couldn't possibly compare to the display of thermal mastery they had just witnessed. He was about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. Captain Chen walked to the equipment area where her team had arranged their demonstration materials. The weapons looked almost primitive compared to the sleek Parathi technology that had just finished performing. Instead of elegant energy projectors and crystalline plasma focuses, the human equipment consisted of metal cylinders, fuel tanks, and what appeared to be simple mechanical components. Zethka followed at a respectful distance, his curiosity overcoming his initial dismissive attitude. The other galactic observers also moved closer, eager to see what these newcomers might have brought to show. The contrast was striking. Where Parathi equipment hummed with barely contained energy and glowed with internal heat, the human weapons looked cold and inert. Before we begin, Captain Chen announced to the gathered crowd, I should mention that our demonstration will be somewhat different from what you just saw. Parathi technology focuses on precision and controlled energy release. Human weapons tend to be more... She paused, searching for the right word. Practical. She picked up one of the cylindrical devices, and Zethka could see that it consisted of a handheld projector connected by a flexible tube to a tank that one of her soldiers wore on his back. The mechanism appeared to be purely mechanical, with no visible energy source or advanced targeting systems. This is what we call a flamethrower, Captain Chen explained. The principle is quite simple. We mix fuel with an accelerant, ignite it, and project the burning mixture toward the target. Several members of the audience exchanged glances. The concept seemed absurdly primitive compared to the plasma technology they had just witnessed. Zethka found himself wondering if the humans were making some kind of joke, though their expressions remained completely serious. The fuel mixture we're using today is based on a petroleum derivative we call napalm, Chen continued. It's designed to stick to surfaces and burn persistently. She turned to her team and spoke quietly. All right, people, let's show them what Earth's finest can do. Then she added something that the universal translators rendered literally, but which seemed to confuse most of the alien observers. Jones, hold my beer. Private Jones, a young man with nervous eyes, took a cylindrical container from Chen and stepped back. The captain hefted her weapon and approached the target area, where several rock formations still remained from the Parathi demonstration. The air still shimmered with residual heat from the plasma weapons, and pools of cooling lava dotted the landscape. What happened next would be discussed in galactic military academies for the next 100 years. Captain Chen squeezed the trigger of her flamethrower, and a stream of burning liquid erupted from the nozzle. But this was unlike anything the observers had ever seen. Where Parathi plasma burned with clean, controlled energy, the human fire was wild and hungry. The burning fuel splashed against the rock targets and immediately began to spread, flowing like liquid death across every surface it touched. The flame wasn't just hot, it was alive. It crawled around obstacles, found its way into cracks and crevices, and continued burning with an intensity that actually made several heat-resistant species step backward. The napalm clung to vertical surfaces, defying gravity as it continued its relentless consumption of everything in its path. Zethka watched in growing amazement as the fire spread far beyond the initial target area. Unlike plasma weapons that delivered their energy in precise, controllable bursts, this human fire seemed to have a mind of its own. It sought out fuel sources he hadn't even noticed, trace organic compounds in the rock, atmospheric gases, even metal alloys that should have been immune to normal combustion. The temperature readings were astounding. While Parathi weapons achieved higher peak temperatures, the human fire maintained its heat over a much larger area for a much longer time. The napalm continued burning minutes after Chen had stopped firing, and the flames showed no signs of diminishing. The effective duration depends on environmental factors, Captain Chen explained conversationally. as if she weren't demonstrating what was clearly one of the most terrifying weapons any of them had ever seen. In optimal conditions, napalm can burn for up to 10 minutes. It's particularly effective against bunkers, vehicles, and personnel. She paused and added with characteristic human understatement. It also tends to have a significant psychological impact on enemy forces. Zethka could understand why. The Parathi were accustomed to fire as a tool of precision and artistry. Their flames obeyed commands, followed targeting protocols, and behaved according to the laws of plasma physics. This human fire was chaos incarnate. It burned with primal hunger, spreading wherever it could find fuel and continuing long after its creators had moved on. "How do you control it?" asked Ambassador Veltar, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. Captain Chen shrugged. "You don't, really. That's kind of the point. Once you deploy napalm, it does its job until it runs out of fuel or oxygen. The idea is to create an area denial weapon that continues working, even when you're not actively operating it." The implications were staggering. Parathi weapons required constant energy input from their users. Plasma beams lasted only as long as someone was pulling the trigger and feeding power to the projector. But this human fire was self-sustaining, burning independently once it was deployed. "What about friendly forces?" asked the Corvin military observer. "How do you prevent this weapon from affecting your own troops?" "Careful planning and good wind forecasting," Chen replied. "Plus, we've developed protective equipment and suppression techniques. But you're right that it's not a precision instrument. Flamethrowers are area effect weapons." She gestured to her team, who brought forward several more examples of human incendiary technology. There were grenades that scattered burning gel over wide areas, projectiles that delivered incendiary payloads deep into structures, and rocket-propelled devices that could spread fire across vast distances. "This is all considered basic infantry equipment," Captain Chen mentioned casually. "Every human soldier is trained in the use of incendiary weapons from their first day of basic training." The alien observers were taking notes furiously. Species that had perfected energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, and exotic matter manipulation were suddenly faced with the realization that they had overlooked something fundamental about the nature of fire itself. Zethka watched the flames continue their relentless advance across the demonstration area. The fire had now spread to cover nearly 10 times the area that Parathi plasma weapons had affected, and it showed no signs of stopping. Worse, from his perspective, was the realization that his people's heat resistance might actually work against them in this scenario. Parathi warriors could survive in plasma fire because plasma behaved predictably, but this human fire was unpredictable, persistent, and carried chemical properties that might overwhelm even Parathi thermal adaptation. "This is just napalm," Captain Chen said, almost as an afterthought. "We have much more interesting incendiary compounds back on Earth. Thermite, white phosphorus, fuel air explosives." She trailed off, seemingly lost in thought. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling sound of still burning napalm and the nervous shifting of various alien observers. Zethka realized that everything he thought he knew about thermal warfare had just been challenged by a species using technology that was thousands of years older than Parathi plasma weapons. These humans hadn't mastered fire. They had weaponized its fundamental nature. The demonstration area continued to burn as the gathered observers stood in stunned silence. What had started as a simple weapons test had become something much more unsettling. The napalm fire spread across the rocky surface with an intelligence that defied explanation, finding fuel sources that shouldn't have existed and maintaining temperatures that challenged even Parathi heat tolerance. Zethka felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare: uncertainty. His thermal sensors, designed to analyze and predict the behavior of plasma and energy weapons, could not calculate the fire's next move. The flames followed no pattern he recognized, obeyed no laws of controlled combustion, and seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker as time passed. "Commander," whispered his tactical advisor, a younger Parathi named Kethra, whose expertise in thermal dynamics was considered exceptional even by their standards. "My analysis equipment cannot predict the fire's behavior. The chemical composition appears to be changing as it burns. This should have been impossible." Parathi fire technology was based on precise control of thermal energy. Their weapons delivered exact amounts of heat to specific targets for predetermined durations. Every aspect of Parathi plasma weaponry could be calculated, controlled, and contained. But this human fire was organic, evolutionary, adaptable. Captain Chen continued her explanation with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. The beauty of incendiary weapons is their simplicity. No targeting computers, no energy cells to recharge, no complex maintenance requirements. You point, you shoot, and chemistry takes care of the rest. Ambassador Veltar stepped closer to Zethka, his diplomatic composure showing cracks of genuine concern. War Commander, how would our forces respond to weapons like this? It was a question that Zethka had been trying to avoid thinking about. Pyrathi military doctrine was built around thermal superiority. Their warriors were trained to fight in environments where heat was their ally and their enemy's weakness. But these human weapons turned heat into something else entirely, an independent force that could not be commanded or controlled. Our armor is designed to dissipate plasma energy, he replied quietly, hoping the human delegation could not overhear. But this chemical fire, it doesn't behave like energy weapons. It might actually use our heat resistance against us. The horrible truth was becoming clear. Parathi warriors could survive in plasma fire because plasma followed predictable rules. Energy dissipated according to known formulas. Temperatures could be calculated and compensated for. And plasma beams had defined beginning and ending points. But napalm was different. It was chemistry, not physics. It was persistent rather than instant, chaotic rather than controlled. Worse still, Parathi physiology might actually make them more vulnerable to chemical incendiaries. Their high body temperatures and enhanced metabolism could accelerate chemical reactions. Their heat-adapted skin might absorb burning chemicals more readily than the cooler flesh of other species. For the first time in his military career, Zethka found himself wondering if Parathi thermal adaptation was actually a weakness rather than a strength. Captain Chen had moved on to demonstrating additional human incendiary devices. She showed them grenades that scattered burning gel across wide areas, creating instant barriers of flame that could last for hours. She displayed projectiles that delivered incendiary payloads deep into structures where they would burn from the inside out. Most disturbing of all were the rocket-propelled devices that could spread fire across distances measured in kilometers. Fuel air. Explosives are particularly interesting. She mentioned while handling a device that looked deceptively simple. They disperse an aerosol cloud of fuel, then ignite it all at once. The explosion can consume all available oxygen in an area, while generating temperatures comparable to your plasma weapons, but sustained over a much larger volume. The Corvin observer, whose species specialized in kinetic weapons, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What prevents these weapons from spreading beyond your intended target area? Captain Chen's smile was genuinely cheerful, which made her answer even more disturbing. Well, that's always been a bit of a challenge. Early versions of napalm were notorious for spreading into unintended areas. We've gotten better at controlling the dispersal patterns, but incendiary weapons are inherently unpredictable. That's part of what makes them effective. Zethka realized that humans approached warfare from a fundamentally different perspective than any other species he had encountered. Where others sought precision and control, humans seemed to embrace chaos and uncertainty. They had weaponized unpredictability itself. The fire from the original napalm demonstration was still burning, now covering an area roughly the size of a small city district. The flames had found their way into fissures in the rock that even Parathi geological surveys had missed, and the heat was actually increasing rather than decreasing as chemical reactions cascaded through previously unknown mineral deposits. How long will it continue burning? Asked the crystalline Zephyrian representative, whose species' energy-based physiology made them particularly sensitive to thermal phenomena. Hard to say, Captain Chen replied. Depends on what it finds to burn. Could be hours, could be days. That's one of the advantages of chemical incendiaries over energy weapons. They're self-sustaining once deployed. The implications for military strategy were staggering. Parathi doctrine emphasized quick, decisive battles where superior thermal technology could be brought to bear against enemy forces. But human incendiary weapons could deny territory for extended periods, creating barriers and obstacles that would persist long after the humans had moved on to other objectives. You mentioned more advanced incendiary compounds, Veltar said carefully. What other weapons has your species developed? Captain Chen's expression became thoughtful. Well, there's white phosphorus, which burns at over 800 degrees and is nearly impossible to extinguish. Thermite can melt through several inches of steel in seconds. We've also developed some interesting variants using metallic fuels that burn underwater or in vacuum environments. She paused, then added almost casually, and then there are the more exotic compounds we've been working on. Self-oxidizing incendiaries that don't need atmospheric oxygen, chemical mixtures that actually get hotter as they burn, plasticized explosives that can be molded into any shape and then triggered remotely. Zethka felt his confidence in Pyrathi military supremacy crumbling with each casual revelation. These humans spoke of horrifying weapons as if they were discussing gardening tools. They had clearly spent considerable time and effort developing ways to make fire more destructive, more persistent, and more uncontrollable. The most disturbing aspect was their attitude. Captain Chen and her team showed no sign of being impressed or intimidated by Pyrathi plasma technology. They had watched demonstrations that could vaporize mountains and responded with polite interest, as if they had seen similar displays many times before. It suggested that human military capabilities extended far beyond simple incendiary weapons. As the afternoon wore on and the napalm fire continued its relentless spread across the demonstration area, Zethka began to understand that the Pyrathi had been thinking about fire all wrong. They had mastered the science of thermal energy, but humans had weaponized its primal nature. Where Pyrathi sought control and precision, humans had embraced chaos and persistence. The galaxy was about to become a much more dangerous place. 3 hours had passed since Captain Chen's demonstration began, and the napalm fire showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it had grown stronger, spreading across nearly half the demonstration area and penetrating deep into geological formations that the mining companies had thought were solid rock. The flames had taken on a life of their own, creating their own weather patterns as superheated air rose and cooled, generating winds that fed more oxygen to the fire. Zethka stood at the observation platform's edge, watching his understanding of warfare crumble and rebuild itself. Everything the Pyrathi thought they knew about fire had been based on control, precision, and the application of scientific principles to thermal energy. But these humans had approached the same fundamental force from the opposite direction, embracing its chaotic nature and weaponizing its hunger. The other galactic observers had grown quiet as the implications sank in. Species that had developed weapons capable of cracking planets were staring in fascination at a technology that was thousands of years old by human standards. The contrast was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. Captain Chen approached Zethka, still carrying her flamethrower as if it were no more dangerous than a walking stick. The weapon that had redefined his understanding of thermal warfare looked like something a primitive civilization might cobble together from spare parts. Yet it had accomplished something that Pyrathi plasma technology could not. It had created fire that thought for itself. "War Commander," she said, her voice carrying the same conversational tone she had used throughout the demonstration. "Your people's plasma technology is genuinely impressive. The precision and energy control are far beyond anything we've achieved on Earth." Zethka found himself uncertain how to respond. Accepting praise for Pyrathi technology felt hollow after witnessing what human weapons could accomplish. "Your incendiary weapons," he replied carefully, "represent a different approach to thermal warfare than any we have encountered." "Different isn't necessarily better," Captain Chen said with characteristic human modesty. "Just different. Your plasma weapons can deliver precise amounts of energy to exact locations. Our incendiaries are more like controlled disasters. Each approach has its advantages." But Zethka was beginning to understand that the human approach offered capabilities that Pyrathi technology simply could not match. Plasma weapons required enormous energy sources, complex targeting systems, and constant operator control. Human incendiary weapons were self-sustaining, required minimal infrastructure, and could be deployed by individual soldiers with basic training. "Captain Chen," he said, making a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier, "would your people be interested in discussing technological exchange agreements?" The question surprised several of the galactic observers. The Pyrathi Empire had never requested technology sharing with a species they considered militarily inferior. In 3,000 years of expansion, they had always been the ones offering advanced thermal technology to less developed civilizations, in exchange for resources or political concessions. Captain Chen's expression became more serious. That would depend on what kind of exchange you have in mind. Earth's military doctrine is based on practical effectiveness rather than technological sophistication. Our weapons are designed to be simple, reliable, and producible with minimal industrial infrastructure, which is exactly what makes them so valuable, Zethka admitted. Parathi weapons require extensive manufacturing facilities and rare materials. Your incendiary weapons could be produced anywhere, by anyone with basic chemical knowledge. The tactical implications were staggering. Human incendiary technology could democratize thermal warfare, making effective fire weapons available to species that could never afford or maintain Parathi plasma technology. More importantly for the Parathi Empire, it could provide capabilities that their own weapons lacked: persistence, area denial, and psychological impact. Ambassador Veltar joined the conversation, his diplomatic instincts recognizing the historical significance of the moment. Perhaps we should discuss this further in a more formal setting. The Galactic Council would need to approve any major technology sharing agreements. Captain Chen nodded, but her attention was drawn to the still-burning demonstration area. The fire had now reached the edge of the designated safe zone and was beginning to threaten the observation platforms themselves. "We should probably do something about that," she said, pointing to the advancing flames. "Can it be extinguished?" Zethka asked, realizing that this was yet another aspect of human fire weapons he hadn't considered. Pyrathy plasma beams simply shut off when the operator stopped firing, but napalm fire was independent of its creators. "Eventually," Captain Chen replied. "We brought some suppression equipment, but honestly, it's easier to just let chemical fires burn themselves out unless there's something specific you need to protect." She gestured to her team, who began setting up what appeared to be foam dispensers and chemical suppression systems. Even their firefighting equipment looked primitive compared to Parathi technology. But Zethka was beginning to understand that human engineering prioritized effectiveness over elegance. As the human soldiers worked to contain the fire they had created, Zethka found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about military technology. The Parathi had spent millennia perfecting weapons that could deliver precise amounts of thermal energy with scientific accuracy. But humans had created weapons that were more effective precisely because they were less controlled. "War Commander," Kethra approached with a datapad full of sensor readings. "My analysis of the human weapons suggests they could be integrated with our existing thermal technology. Imagine plasma weapons that could ignite incendiary compounds, or targeting systems that could direct persistent chemical fires." The possibilities were intriguing and disturbing. Parathi precision combined with human chaos could create weapons more devastating than either species had developed alone. But it would also mean abandoning 3,000 years of military doctrine based on thermal control and embracing the human philosophy of weaponized unpredictability. Captain Chen had successfully contained the napalm fire using a combination of chemical suppressants and barrier creation. The process took nearly an hour and required more equipment than Zethka had expected, highlighting another aspect of human weapons. They required as much planning to stop as they did to deploy. As the demonstration area finally cooled and the last flames were extinguished, the various galactic observers began to disperse, but Zethka remained, watching the human team pack their equipment with the same casual efficiency they had shown during the demonstration. "Captain," he said as she supervised the loading of the flamethrower components, "you mentioned that this was basic infantry equipment. What do your people consider advanced incendiary weapons?" Captain Chen paused in her work and gave him a look that was part amusement and part concern. "War Commander, I'm not sure you're ready for that conversation yet. What we showed you today represents technology that's over a century old by our standards." The implications of that statement sent a chill through Zethka's heat-adapted physiology. If napalm flamethrowers were obsolete human technology, what had they developed more recently? What kinds of incendiary weapons were human soldiers carrying into battle right now? "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should begin with smaller exchanges. Technical data, basic principles, theoretical discussions." "That sounds reasonable," Captain Chen agreed. "Fire is dangerous enough when you understand it. Fire that you don't understand can burn down everything you've built." As the human shuttle lifted off from Kepler 442c, carrying with it a delegation that had just redefined galactic warfare, Zethka began composing his report to the Parathi High Command. For the first time in his military career, he would be recommending that the Empire request an alliance with a species they had initially planned to intimidate. The Masters of Flame had found their teachers, and the galaxy would never be the same. Captain Chen, visible through the shuttle's viewport as it climbed toward orbit, casually lit what appeared to be a small chemical fire and placed it between her lips. The sight of her treating flame so casually, so carelessly, was perhaps the most unsettling thing Zethka had witnessed all day. Humans didn't just use fire as a weapon. They lived with it, carried it with them, and treated it as a constant companion. They had domesticated the very force that the Parathi worshipped as sacred and turned it into a tool so common that their soldiers used it for personal comfort. The Parathi Empire had spent 3 millennia learning to command fire, but humans had spent much longer learning to live with it, and that made all the difference.